Alright everybody, now this video here is going to be about how to stop paying utility bills, or how to live without having utility bills, and basically that means being off-grid. This is a little bit different of a video than I'm used to doing. I normally don't get very personal about things that have happened to me in my life and why I do a lot of the things that I do, but I think it's about time that I explain this kind of thing to my viewers, because I've had a lot of people ask me about this. Why would I be wanting to be self-sufficient? Why would I want to go live in a small shed out in the middle of nowhere with no modern conveniences? And why am I growing food? Why do I do a lot of the things that I do? And I had a guy named Daniel ask me a question today, and I'm going to read off the question and explain it. This may be a little bit longer of a video than my normal videos, but if you guys don't have anything else going on and you're kind of interested in just hearing me talk about things and things that have happened to me in my life, then I'm sure you're going to enjoy this. But if it's too long or too personal, I apologize. Just go ahead and click off. Don't even bother watching. And yeah. So I'm going to go into it. And I normally don't talk about a lot of this stuff with thousands of people and people I've never met before, but I think it's important. I really do. I think it's really important. But this is the question he asked me. He said, I was wondering, after watching many of your videos about your off-grid camp, I was wondering if you have a post that gives the background as to what made you want to do this. Where you were able to get the ground and how much ground, meaning the property that I bought. Do you intend to drill for a well, and what are your plans for sewage? I'm interested in the hows and whys. Now, thanks, Daniel. That's what he said. Now, to explain why I want to be self-sufficient and be off the grid, it kind of goes back. I'm gonna give you a little background of my story. When I was a young kid, me, my brother, and my sister, and my parents lived with my grandparents in Chicago, North Chicago, in the suburbs. And we'd lived there pretty much until my grandparents passed away. And my grandparents worked their whole lives. They used to live on a farm, and I used to hear stories, and we used to visit the farm where my grandparents' brothers still live there, in the same farm that they all grew up on. And we lived in a little tiny home in the suburbs, a small yard, modern America. The school was walking distance, and things were great. This was in the 90s, and my grandparents worked their whole life to pay for that house and to pay off the one small car that they had. And not only did they do that, but they also bought 10 acres of land in Wisconsin as like a place to go on the weekends and somewhere my grandpa could go deer hunting. And they had two small houses out there. Well, they had a little tiny shed, like a little tiny trailer from the 1970s that was pretty beat up, and they ended up renting that out, and they bought a modular home that they stayed in. They would go and stay up there and stuff like that, and they enjoyed getting away. They grew up out in the country, so they always went on vacation. They always went down to North Carolina and stuff like that. And when my grandparents passed away, we moved around a lot. My dad was a car salesman, and sometimes we'd move 3-4 times within the same year, whether work or whatever the case is. And I'm not saying that my father didn't have anything, but whatever he did do, we were living with my grandparents. I didn't know a lot about it at the time. So my grandparents passed away, and they left my father the house that was paid for in Chicago, and the 10 acres with the two houses on them in Wisconsin. Now, the houses in Wisconsin, the 10 acres, was not for them. It wasn't for my parents. It was for the grandkids, and they left the land and the two houses in a trust, so that way when me, my sister, and my brother got older, we could have that land, and things would be a little bit easier for us to kind of get them. We'd have something. They worked their whole life, so that way we wouldn't have to. And what we did eventually was we moved out of Chicago, lived in the house that my grandparents put in Wisconsin, and we rented out that one. Well, my dad sold a house in Chicago for about $170,000, and he he started buying land around there and putting some other modular homes out there that he could rent out. And he did that for a long time. And what he actually ended up having to do was he took a loan out on the family trust, the land, the 10 acres, and the two homes that my grandparents left for us kids. And in order to do that, even though we were young, we had to sign off on it. I remember being like 13, 14 years old, and my dad having me sign this piece of paper so that way he could so-called do business and, do all these different things. So I signed the little pad, and I was a kid. I was like, I just want to keep playing my video games, leave me alone. So I signed the piece of paper, and my dad took out a loan on the property. And he bought 75 acres around us and put about 10 homes, 10 modular homes that he rented out and as a rental income. So that's what he did. He wasn't selling cars anymore. He was basically a landlord. Well, my brother and sister didn't graduate high school. They just kind of dropped out. They did their own thing. And my dad started having problems with the bank by the time I was about 18, and the tenants stopped paying rent and were taking him to court for a bunch of stuff, and it was just a big hassle, and he wasn't able to make all the payments on everything because he'd taken a loan out. It wasn't like we actually owned him. And by the time I was 3 months away from graduating high school, it took me an extra year to graduate high school because I messed around and everything like that too, and I was in a special charter program. It took me a long time to get into it so I could graduate. And they wanted to move back down to Chicago because the bank was auctioning off all of the property up there. And I didn't want to. I decided I'd rather stay up here, stay with my friends so I could graduate high school because nobody in my family did. And that was something I wanted to do. I wanted to get that past me. So my parents moved down to Chicago and moved into a house that they were renting out. The bank came and auctioned off all of the property, the 10 acres that my grandparents originally bought, all of the other homes that my dad had put in for rentals, and he convinced my brother and sister to buy the land that my grandparents originally bought and take out a loan on it so that way we could keep it in the family. And my brother owed like $75,000 for the trailer that my grandparents originally put there, and my sister was about 50 because she owned land that had no home on it. And I was too young at that time, or I just didn't, I wasn't a part of it. I wasn't part of the auction, I guess you could say. And I got to stay in the house that we were living in until the bank foreclosed on it or whatever and took everything. And so I got to graduate high school while my parents were living in Chicago renting out a place. And being a kid and seeing all this stuff happen where your life, your home, things that have been in your families for as long as you could remember were just taken away from you. The bank just came and took everything. And this was about 10 years ago when this all happened. And since then, things have been messed up. I've moved around, lived with my brother for a while, lived with other people, rented out rooms, worked little, $6, $7 an hour jobs before the minimum wage went up, $6.50 an hour. And it's been tough, man. It's been really, really, really tough. And knowing that you have a mortgage on something that you don't own it, when things get tough and the wind just blows in that direction, you could be homeless, and your kids are homeless, and you're forced into doing things that that you haven't done before. And I lived with my brother for a while. I've had apartments. I've lived in Milwaukee, Brooklyn, Chicago, Central Wisconsin, Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. I've moved all around trying to find something, and it's been impossible. It is impossible for me to, when I was on my own, like before I met my wife, it was impossible for me to pay bills. I was getting paid a great job. I was a store manager of a store at the mall. I was getting paid more than people that were older than me, that were my employees, and I still couldn't pay the bills. The amount of money that you bring in, the cost of living, utility bills and all that stuff, and you still can't make it. Really, when you're young and you start to get a taste of the world and you realize that it's a big joke and that it's never going to happen, and it makes you kind of think about the things that were actually left to you so you could have an easier life. And I don't blame my dad for doing the things that he did, but I know things would be a lot different if I actually had something to build on rather than paying somebody else's mortgage and renting out places and renting rooms from people and not having a lot of space. So for the longest time, since I was about 21 or 22, I'd been kicked around, moved out of my apartment, had a bunch of stuff in storage, went all the way to Brooklyn, came back and was living in my brother with no car, no job, no money, staying in one of his rooms. And I started going online trying to find solutions, trying to find ways that I could live in a small area and not have to worry about that. And I came across geodesic domes, and I had drawings that I had drawn up of geodesic domes on basements where it was really cheap. You could have a house for under $10,000 and some land, and I was making contacts, and that was all dreams and everything like that at that point. And I've always wanted to live a more simple life because seeing everything that happened, biting off more than you can chew and where it puts you eventually, seeing it as a kid firsthand, we had boats and cars and all this stuff, and the bank came and took everything. And my dad still owed money, so they wanted to seize property that he had paid off, his cars and everything. So he took off to Chicago. So it it's a big eye opener. It's a big eye opener knowing that you can't you can't owe a bunch of money and not pay the bills, or bite off more than you can chew, meaning having a mortgage that's very expensive and things get tough and expecting things to be the same. If you have a family, there's a lot of responsibilities you have in creating a stable home situation. And, a lot of people, the only option there is mortgage, or that they've had a mortgage for 10 or 15, even 20 years. And it's, they just keep refinancing, so that way they're just rolling the ball down the hill even farther. So I've always known that it's better to start off with something small, have it paid off, and then just go from there. Start off with a couple acres, small home, and you might have to downsize. Your standard of living might be a little bit different than it used to be, but you'll have more time. You won't, if things get tough, you won't have to worry about those things, about not having a place to live. And how am I going to pay my rent? How am I going to pay the bills? Because that's already paid for. Your home's paid for, your land is paid for, and knowing that a house is $150,000, and when you can't get a loan, well, how many times I went to the bank and tried to get loans for things, I tried to get a loan for a trailer for $22,000, and it was brand new on a lot in a subdivision. I couldn't even get that, and that was when I was in my 20s. Trying to get a loan, trying to get ahead, trying to own my own stuff, and not having the cash is impossible unless you have enough money. Anybody used to be able to get a loan. You got a social security number, you can get a loan. Now you have to put up as much collateral towards that loan in order for the bank to give it to you. Otherwise it's too big of a risk for them, so they wouldn't even touch me. I didn't have any credit established, I didn't have anything, and that's just how it was. So I knew I had to buy land, paid off, save some money. I had to rent, get a good enough job, save up enough money after 3 or 4 or 5 years, and buy something cash. And that's what I did. Instead of putting my money in the bank or anything like that, I bought silver. And I bought a lot of silver, and I did that for 4 or 5 years. I had stocks, piles of silver. And what I did was I eventually found some land, and this was a year ago, just about a year ago now, right in March. And I found it on landwatch.com. Landwatch.com is a real estate search engine that allows you to find the cheapest property possible in each state. Any land that's on the market with a real estate agent is on landwatch.com. You go there, you can search states, prices, start at the bottom from the lowest price and work your way up. And I knew I wouldn't be able to get something for 10 or 20 acres. I knew I would have to get something for a couple acres for a couple $1,000s. So that's what I did, and I ended up trying to sell my silver, which is almost impossible, and the only way you can sell your silver is less than what you paid for it, less than the going rate. So I lost a bunch of money on my silver, but I made an offer on the land that was less than what the guy was asking, so I considered it breaking even. So I bought the land cash and put a tiny little house on there. And even though it's not as big as, it's about the same size as some bedrooms, it's mine. The bank's not going to take it from me. My son doesn't have to worry about dad feeling, the bank coming and taking things that you grew up in places that you played when you were a kid, and spending time in the woods and everything. And so I started teaching myself how to be self-sufficient, how to break my dependency on money. When you do things for money, it's for the wrong reasons. You need to worry more about your family, because trying to make that money, you neglect your family. When you work 10-hour days and you know you don't get to spend that time with your family. Other people raise your kids, and then you still don't even have enough money at the end of the month to pay the bills and even save any money. You can pay the bills, but try getting ahead. That's impossible. The people were able to do that back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, but in the year 2000, everybody knows it's tough. Unless you're getting paid $100,000 a year job, you're not getting ahead. You're staying in the same spot. So I wanted to get to a point to where the money that I did make, I didn't owe it to anybody. I didn't have to do all this different stuff. I found some land that the taxes on it are $88 a year, 3.8 acres in the middle of nowhere, where there's no restrictions on the land. The neighbors have small, tiny little log cabins. They're all country, and sit on their porch and stuff, and shoot trees across the yard with their shotguns and stuff like that. And it makes sense. To become self-sufficient nowadays could be the difference between life and death. And it's pretty serious to talk about that. I don't really talk about that a lot very much anymore, but the fact that sometimes you have to move 2 or 3 times just to find a job, if you could even find a job. Most people are on unemployment or disability, or government assistant programs, or they're staying with family because they can't get ahead. All the kids I went to school with, that went to college, got out of college, they're still living with their parents. All my friends that I went to school with, they're still living with their parents. They don't have a home, they don't have a land, they have a car payment, they have a student loan that they're paying off, and they're working at KFC or as lifeguards at the water parks and stuff like that. That was the same job I had when I was 16 years old, was being a lifeguard. Now you've got debt. So nonetheless, is it hard enough to get by without having bills and debt and mortgage payments and student loans, that it's almost impossible now. Nobody really talks about how things are going to be like for my generation or for my son's generation. So I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing this so that way my son can have a place where he'll always have fresh food. He can always go there. If he decides to create businesses from what I've already set up for him, selling honey, selling gourmet mushrooms, fruit stands, driving to the city and getting top dollar for fruit trees that Dad planted 20 years ago. And not to mention there's no mortgage. Electricity's paid off with solar. Water is either rainwater or it comes from a well. And since I'm doing everything on a cash basis, you have to start somewhere. You're not going to be able to have that big house. You're not going to have, when you do things where you can't get a loan to pay for the big stuff, and you have to save up enough money to get that, you got to start small. And with water, I'd like to drill a well, but it's going to cost at least $3,000 to get that, and that's going to take me a lot of years just saving up just to get to that point where I'd have enough money to do that. So I'm going to start out with rainwater. I'm going to put rainwater collection and use that for a shower to start out. Also, we could fill water up and stuff like that from either the rainwater or from town for the sinks. And eventually there will be plumbing set up where it's not city water. It all comes from the well. And any electricity for the pump would come from either solar, wind, or any other way that I decide to try to make electricity. Who knows what's going to happen in the next 10 years? We don't really know. So when my generation, the only way we'll ever have anything is by paying cash for it, it takes a lot of time to get to that point. And I saved up money for years and years, probably about 4 or 5 years, just to get enough money, just to get $7,000. And just to get $7,000 saved up to buy something small and then go from there. Now, with the sewage, it costs like $3,000 to get or $300 to get a perk test to test if you can have a septic, and another $2,000 or $3,000 to have a septic installed. And I've got running water at the bottom of the hill of my property with a beautiful creek running through it, and the shit rolls downhill. Not only just figuratively but literally. And I didn't want anything leaching into the ground to affect that water down there. Because if we decide to, put fish in there and dig it deeper and put a little pond in there, or even go down there and harvest water, I don't have to worry about there being sewage in it. So I did some research and I found out about composting toilets, which are a toilet where you basically, instead of using water, you use either a soil medium or sawdust, and you lay it down in the toilet first. You do your business on top of it, and then lay that on top of it, either dirt or wood chips. There's no smell from it. It is safe. It's not a biohazard necessarily. I'm sure it is, but it's not as bad as, let's say, raw sewage coming out of the ground, or living in the city and on rainy days it smells like sewage and shit because nobody can have a basement in the state that you live in South Carolina, and you smell the sewage of all these subdivisions and neighborhoods and apartment buildings. You know what I mean? It's not like that. It's actually it can actually be recycled and put back into the land. When you're growing your own food and taking things from the land, it's always better to put those things back. That's how people did that for thousands and thousands of years. The way that we've been doing things for the last 100 years is not how human beings should be living. We are increasing our standard of living, but our quality of life goes down. And 10-Year Vet summed that up the best. When you try to have this great life with all these modern conveniences, your quality of life goes down. You have to spend all your time working just to pay for those things. And I don't think that's fair to me or to my family to do that. I don't plan on putting my son in school. I'm going to be homeschooling him personally. And in order to do that, I need to not have to worry about selling my time just to keep the lights on and keep food on the table, because I had already thought about that ahead of time. And the solar panels give us all the light that we need at nighttime, or sunshine during skylights from the roof during the daytime. And all the food that we're going to be growing is either from the neighbors or from our yard. And try to eliminate my need on being a consumer. People used to produce things back in the day, all the way up until, the 1980s and stuff like that. More people made their own products. More things in the United States were actually made here instead of coming from China. People in North Carolina up here, they made furniture and textiles and fabrics. And, now I'm surrounded by Christmas trees. So this is a new thing. Everybody, they're supplying the consumerism, the fact that Christmas is, nobody's growing food the way they used to. Instead, they're doing things for money, and there's nothing wrong with growing things like that. But when you're just feeding somebody's greed and their inability to produce things for themselves, it used to be fun to go out and go cut down a Christmas tree. Now you go to you drive, you're in the suburbs, you stop at a stand and go and do that. People used to do things a lot differently, and I think there's a quality of life that I've never grown up and known that I feel like I'm missing. When I started growing my own food, and just since I moved here, having chickens and doing all these things, it makes you more connected to the food that you eat, makes you more connected to nature, to your family, to the world around you. And I feel like there's not a lot of that in the world right now. I think there's a lot of people that are disconnected. The only thing I see in their eyes is dollar signs. The only reason they do things is because they need money, and that comes from a lack of having the opportunity to be independent. People have put themselves in positions to where they can't produce things on their own. When you live in an apartment building, you can't grow your own food. You can. I did it on a porch and stuff like that, but that ain't nothing. When you take out a mortgage on something that was more than what it's worth even today, 10 years ago, that's putting you in a need. You're dependent on producing massive amounts of money every month just so that way you can live. And I don't think that's the way that people have done it for a long time, and I want to get back to a point to where if I decide to work or sell things for money at the end of the season, or for whatever reason, if I provide services to people, I don't want to feel like that's not even my money, that it's just in my pocket for the time being, and eventually I got to give it to somebody because I've got this great house and I've got all these bills I got to pay and a new car and all this stuff. And that's what's important to me, is to not have money but to have time, to have, not to have conveniences of being close to things, but having the convenience of having fresh air and fresh food and fresh water and a home cooked meal. I don't like to go out to eat or go to fast food places. I'd rather spend a lot less money and cook at home and sit around the table with my family, which not a lot of people do anymore. And I think that was important. You had better food, and especially if the food you're eating came from outside, either less the grocery store. And there's not a lot of that anymore. Most people don't even have time to spend with their kids to cook food. They just got off work. They don't want to think about it. They stopped at McDonald's on the way, or they bought a rotisserie chicken, or, whatever the case is. Dad just got home and mom had to go to work because she's working the night shift. And dad's too busy to spend time with the kids. So the kids are stuck, raising themselves or having other people raise them. So I feel the need to live a simple life, where I've got more time and quality time with my family. Quality time, good food, where things aren't as big as they used to be as me growing up. But nobody's going to take that away from us. The bank's not going to come and put a letter on our door that our land's being auctioned off. That's my family's. That's for my son, so that way he could build on top of that. If I make life easier for him, so that way when he's in his 20s like me, he can build on top of my successes. When you start out and you have nothing, it takes you hard to get up to that point to where you've got time to think about things. How could you write a book or paint or come up with great ideas when you spend all your time selling it to somebody else for money? And that's why I do the things that I do, and that's why it wasn't something that I just decided to do in the last year. It took a lot of timing, a lot of planning, and a lot of being kicked around from place to place and not having anything to appreciate having something little. When you don't have anything, you appreciate the small things. Just the first thing I did was stuck my hands in the ground and smelt the ground and just like, this is mine. Nobody's gonna take it. I don't have to pay rent on it. The next thing is about the sewage. I think I answer that. I'm going to start out with rainwater, and eventually when I get enough money, I'll put a well in, so we'll have more water. Also for sewage, we're going to be doing composting toilets and using the compost in a compost pile, and after a couple years of creating a big mound, you plant fruit trees in there. I wouldn't use it for vegetables or other stuff like that because of the possibility of, E. coli and salmonella or whatever, any types of bacteria getting on the food. You don't want to be pooping. You can pee on your food, but you can't necessarily poop on it, And that's true. Your urine has a lot of nitrogen in it, and you dilute it with water, and it's the perfect fertilizer. But planting fruit trees on old compost piles is the best way to ensure a good, healthy tree. You create all that organic matter that's not steaming and stinking anymore. It's actually dark, rich soil because the microbes, the mycorrhizal fungi, the mushrooms have went in and broke things down, and little bugs and worms have turned that into soil again. But now we use human cow manure and chicken manure, chicken shit and cow shit on our crops that we get at the grocery store. And when you learn about genetically modified food and food that's been sprayed with chemicals that kills things, but we don't think it's killing us, I don't think that's good enough food to be given to my family. So I want to try to grow as healthy as food as possible. I don't trust the food at the stores. It doesn't taste as good. It doesn't look as good. And it doesn't mean as much as when you spend $1 for, actually it's like $3, when you spend like $2 or $3 for one tomato versus picking them off a plant and you can smell it just like that and you watched it grow. There's satisfaction that comes with that, and nobody's satisfied with working a job that they hate, that sucks, and having to sell their time just to live, just to get by. We're slaves. We're actually slaves. When we can't do things on our own and be successful, we're just getting by. You know, you have to work day in and day out just to have somewhere to live and have food on the table, you know, without having money saved up to get out of that point. Nobody has a plan to get out of that point. You know, they think when they get older they're going to retire and collect Social Security in their 401k and everything's going to be peachy, you know, and that, I don't see that happening. You know, when I work with people at my age getting paid the same amount of money as somebody in their 60s, and they say that they're retired but they just got bored and they decided to go back to work. I don't see that happening. I don't want to be the 60-year-old guy working at Walmart putting, you know, groceries in the bag. Not saying that's a bad thing, but I want to hopefully plan now at my age so that way I won't have to be at that point. And I think owning land paid off, owning your home paid off, owning your own electricity paid off, and having your own food supply paid off. Not just in buckets and cans, but also a resupply where your food's naturally growing and you actually spend the time to go out and harvest it every morning and every day. You know, you go out and you pick some veggies and there's your salad. You know, you go out and get some eggs and, you know, some berries and stuff like that, and some yogurt from the neighbor, and there's your breakfast. You know, and I think there's more. It has more meaning to that. You know, you're more connected to things, and life is better that way. And that's my opinion. It's not the same. It's obviously not the same for everybody. A lot of people might not agree with what I'm talking about right now, but I think that when you talk about the things that I'm talking about right now, you question people's reality. You question the reality that they've had and they've built around themselves for so long, and they get defensive. You know, I can't talk to this about my dad. He doesn't agree with the fact that I want to live out in the country and grow food and have chickens and do all this stuff. I've had a lot of fights and arguments with my dad about that, and he feels that he told me that my grandfather said that the best things in life is to live 5 minutes from work, right down the street. You've got the grocery store, you're close to everything, and you're not in the middle of nowhere. And you know, he thinks what I'm doing is a bad decision, moving my family out in the middle of nowhere and trying to be independent and try to be self-sufficient and try to produce things. You know, I don't want to talk about that too much and stuff like that, but let's just say I don't have a lot of support from the people that have made bad decisions in their life, and you know, that affect me. Let's just say that. But when you question what people do on a regular basis, or you mention that you try to say that you're planning on doing something different, which is counter what they're doing, counterculture. The first thing people do is they get angry, and then they get nasty, man. They say nasty things, and it's just you know, people think living in a small house and, you know, taking a rainwater shower is lower than them, is beneath them, and that's fine. That's fine. But this is what I'm doing, and this is what I'm doing, and I'm sharing that with other people. And, you know, everybody has their own opinion, but nobody's going to do anything unless they have to. You know, nobody's going to realize the importance of having a small home and small piece of land paid off until they don't have anything, until they're stuck staying on their brother's couch with no job, no money, no car, no nothing. You know, and at that point, that's when you really appreciate the little things in life. And that's what I'm doing. A small, simple life where I've got time, I've got fresh food, fresh air, fresh water, and I've got time to learn how to play my Native American flute and paint and write books and learn how to grow things and educate myself and my family and teach my son things at the same time. And in modern society, you don't have that opportunity. So that's why I'm doing it. And I apologize it's been so long. It's probably 30 minutes by now. But I feel like this is something I should get out there, and if anybody else has any questions like this, then I could just refer you to this video. So thanks for watching. I hope you guys enjoy it. I hope I didn't offend anybody. I'm just telling things from my life experience as a young guy in his 20s with a young family. So have a good one, guys. Take care.
Oh, he just flew over here. Come on, chickies. Look at you little chickens. Look at you guys. Come on.